So today's speaker is John Weir. John is currently a research associate on the faculty of the Natural Resource Ecology and Management Department at Oklahoma State University. Prior to that, he was the superintendent of the OSU Research Range for 16 years. He teaches 2 prescribed fire courses, conducts fire ecology research, and has extension responsibilities relating to prescribed fire training and working with landowners to form prescribed burn associations. He's assisted with forming over 25 burn associations in 7 states. In the past 20 years, he's conducted over 950 prescribed burns and vegetation ranging from shortgrass prairie to oak pine forest. He's also the author of a book titled Conducting Prescribed Fires, a comprehensive manual, which is published through Texas A&M University Press. So welcome, John. Thank you for joining us today. I'm now going to hand the microphone over to you.
All right, thank you. And thanks, everyone, for joining in. And we're going to talk a little bit kind of about when we should burn. That's one of the biggest problems that we see, I believe, in the southern Great Plains and in the region around it, is people get really sucked into a specific season of burn. And they think that we can only burn and fires can only occur during that certain time. And so what we're going to talk about is burning outside the box, so to speak, because people have put fire in that box. And to get more fire across the landscape and throughout the things that we do, we have got to start thinking about opening that window up. And a lot of times that's a big issue with people of going outside that traditional burn season that we see. So, looking at it, the question comes up to a lot of people: how come things aren't getting burned? And again, it goes back to we limit burning to one season of the year. Traditionally in a lot of the southern Great Plains, that's the spring. We're talking about late February, March, April time frame, doing in that. The next question, a lot of times people bring up, or they say, well, we don't have enough burn days. Can be due to weather conditions, problems that we run into with that. And so how do we contend with that and get things done? And then a lot of times being limited to just one season of the year and doing that, a lot of the burns that we try to do don't get done. And then what happens is those burns get pushed to the next burn season. So that increases our burn load and increases the amount of burns that we have to do and we have to get done. And then in the overall picture, most things don't get done. And so we fall way behind. And also within doing that, it also changes a lot of our management strategies and management protocol that we do, because we had planned to have something burned and it wasn't burned, so we've got to change management because we're going to do it for, burn it next year and do that. So it complicates the whole system by doing that. So again, if we start thinking about burning different seasons of the year and changing that burn thing up, then we can start opening that up and hopefully eliminating a lot of those problems. So, again, weather is probably our biggest factor that impacts how we can burn and when we can burn. And so, the big question needs to be is, how many days a year do we have where we have decent weather to burn? A lot of times we look at it through a burn season, and we can look at it and get, a good idea of how many days we may have. But if we look at it over the whole year, and also we may be looking at a certain time of the year that may be better than others, and that's the time of year we're not really even burning or even thinking about burning in. So what we had done here in Oklahoma is we had looked at the last 14 years of mesonet data that we had starting in 1993 through 2007. The mesonet is a pretty much near real-time weather stations that we have set up. There's about 120 of them scattered across the state. We picked the one site nearest Stillwater, Oklahoma to do this from. And so what we did, we pulled the 14 years of hourly weather data that we were able to get from the Mesonet. We looked at a burn time that just started from 8 a.m. to about 6 p.m., the time of day that most burns are taking place. And then we put in there a set of conditions to filter out burn days. And these were a temperature range of 35 to 110 degrees, relative humidities ranging from 20 to 80%, wind speeds 4 to 15 mile an hour. There could not be any precipitation recorded during that time frame of that day. And then we decided that there should be at least a minimum of 3 consecutive hours where we had that type of weather conditions to be considered a burn day. So if we had 3 hours within that time frame of 8 to 6 in a day, but 2 of the hours were from 9 to 11, and then the other hour was from 4 to 5, we didn't consider that a burn day. We wanted 3 consecutive good hours of weather conditions for it to be considered a burn day. And from that, we placed that from the whole year. It came out that we averaged about 222 burn days in a year. And I'll be the first to admit that that's an overestimation of it, but it's the best information we got, because it's an overestimate of it because we could not take into consider with our data that we got 6 inches of rain the day before. And, the stuff is just way too wet to burn. We just had to look at precipitation for the day. We did not take into consideration major wind shifts or fronts that were passing through that were changing the weather on that. We couldn't do that. So it's an overestimation of it, but it does give us an idea of how many days that we could possibly have, and also then we start breaking it down into months, into how many days within each month we have. And on average, we have 19 days per month on the average, but if you break it down in a bi-monthly period, as the graph shows here, you start seeing real quick where the best burn times lay. And the most interesting thing about this is if you look at probably about the 3 months that give you the least amount of time to burn, February, March, and April, that's when the biggest majority of people in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, this area, try to burn. Is in the time frame when we actually have the least amount of days that we can get stuff done on average. So it's kind of interesting that we're trying to do that, and then again everybody comes up with that complaint that we don't have enough days to get stuff done. Well, one reason is we're fighting weather conditions. And then if you notice, the 3 best months, July, August, and September. So on that, if we break it down again to look at the total number of burn hours per day, from that 10-hour day from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., it averaged over the year 4.8 hours a day that we had decent weather on those burn days. But again, if you break it down by month and look at it, again, pretty much the 3 months that give you the least amount of burn days, February, March, and April to the point. Again, when everybody's trying to burn, that gives us the least hours per day. The months that give us the best time frame, July, August, and September. We were able, when we did get all of our information, we were able to get the wind directions in degrees, and we broke it down into the 8 cardinal wind directions, and we took an average of the wind direction for each day because, again, wind direction plays a huge role in planning our prescribed burns. Again, for smoke management, also for trying to keep fire off of certain properties or going from a certain direction, doing that. So it's a big impact on it. Also, it can limit us again by needing a number of burn days, but needing days that have specific wind directions on it. Again, as we see it, we have a southerly prevailing wind here in Oklahoma. Again, we can see that south winds, they're pretty easy to come by on average. They're the ones that you're going to get the most of. Northerly winds are going to be there.
Looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with John. I apologize for the delay. If you could just hang on 1 second, we'll try to get this worked out. Again, I apologize for the delay. Let me try to get John back on. It looks like he might be having some technical difficulties on his end. He is participating from Oklahoma at the moment, so let me continue to try to connect with him. I'll be right back.
Am I back?
Yes, John, we can hear you. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
I don't
continue.
I don't know either. It didn't log off. I'm not sure what happened. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Nope, we're back on.
All right. All right, here we go. Sorry about that, folks. Again, as we look back at our burn considerations and our wind directions, a westerly wind in this area here is going to give us, the biggest problem of trying to get that at a certain period of time. Also, if we break that down into certain seasons of the year, a lot of times in certain areas, certain wind directions are difficult to attain. So that throws another wrench in the whole pot that we're trying to make here. So again, wind directions can be a big issue. So take for example here, this is looking at burn days again by wind direction for the month of March. This spiderweb looking thing here, that's a radar graph, and if you start out from the center of it, that's 0, and the first ring coming out there in the web is 2 days, and then you can see 4 days, 6 days. So that's the number of days that you have with a certain wind direction, and those are the 8 cardinal wind directions. So if you look at that, the blue area shaded is the number of days that we get in the month of March. Because if you can remember back, we had about 15, 16 days in March that we had good burn days, but if you break it down by what direction the wind's blowing, it makes a big difference on how we can burn. So again, if you're looking for a south to southwest wind, looks like we're going to be able to get 4 to 5 days on average out of the month of March, just for a south wind. That's not very many if you think about it. Again, if you're looking for a north wind, it's showing up about 3. Again, looking for a west wind, you might get 1 on average in the month of March. So again, if you start thinking about when we're burning and what time periods we're burning and what is some of our limiting factors, especially looking at weather conditions, a lot of times we're thinking about looking at different wind speeds. So we may have 15 days out of the month of March that are good to burn under, but how many of those days are good to burn with a southerly wind direction? So that makes a big difference in it. On the same thing, we can look at July, which keeps showing up as one of the best months to burn here in Oklahoma with, and again, we don't see a lot of burning during that time period, is July. And within that same type of radar graph, it's showing with southerly winds in July, we've got pretty much 12 days of southerly winds with about 6 days of southwest winds and about 5 days of southeast. So, I mean, we've got over 20 days that we can get some type of southerly wind. Granted, burning in July in Oklahoma with a north wind is pretty rare. A lot of times we'd welcome a north wind in July to cool things down, but a lot of times they're not there. But again, these are just averages, and there's definitely ranges within that average. Because a couple of years ago, we had pretty much no north winds in July, and then 4 years ago, we had 7 days with north winds in July. So they do occur, but a lot of times they're hit and miss. But still, we do have a good component of southerly winds during that time frame that we can burn with. So if we look at it and just look at typical burn season, so a typical burn season would be February, March, April. That'd give us about 3.9 hours per month on average during those three months. The rest of the year averages 5.2. So again, looking at that typical burn season here in the southern Great Plains, we limit ourselves by the number of hours per day that we can burn compared to the rest of the year. If we look at number of days, we get about 16 during February, March, and April. The rest of the year is averaging a little over 19. So that's a big difference when days are very limiting that we can have. Also, if you want to look at wind directions by time of year, so February, March, and April, we get more north winds than we do the rest of the year during that time frame because, again, late winter coming through. But if you look at the rest of them, the rest of the year we get a lot more burn days, especially looking at southerly winds, southeast to south. We can get a lot more opportunities to burn other times of the year than we can during that late winter, early spring time frame when most everybody's trying to burn. Again, that's going to make a huge difference in what we can do or what we can get done. So just kind of for an example, if we want to think about this in a big picture, Oklahoma is made up of almost 45 million acres in size. About half of our state, over 22,000 acres of it, is rangeland, forest land, CRP, stuff that will burn, or that should burn. So about half of our state is flammable and needs to burn with doing that. Even just at a minimum, we should be burning everything in this state at least once every 4 years. And so if you did that, that means we need to be burning about 5.6 million acres a year that need to be burned. Currently, we burn approximately 1.5 to 2 million acres a year in this state. But the problem is a lot of those acres are the same acres that they get burned every year in the same region of the state. And so it's a lot of same acreages that getting burned. We're not adding a lot of new acres to the mix within that. So if you think about that, if we burn only during February through April, that only gives us 48 days a year that we're going to burn. And if we're going to try to reach that 5.6 million acres, that means we'd have to burn 117,000 acres a day during that 48-day time period. Again, you think about the smoke issues, the public concerns and things like that, with that much land getting burned every day during that time period, that's a huge factor. But if you take that year round and divide it out among the 222 days that we found, that lowers it down to about 25,000 acres that must be burned each day, spread out over the whole year. So that that would change a lot of outlook on smoke management and other issues that would come around. And so that's a big importance of trying to spread that around, especially spread those burn seasons out, especially with a lot of the issues we have concerning smoke and stuff that are definitely being brought forward now. So, some of the considerations that we ought to think about is, what kind of benefits or what good things can come if we burn during different seasons of the year. Well, if we're considering or concerned about wildlife, they're one of our issues that we'd like to look at. There's a lot of benefits that we can get by burning at different seasons of the year for wildlife. Because again, not all wildlife require the same exact habitat type year-round. We can take quail, for instance. Quail need cover for nesting cover, which that would be unburned or areas that haven't burned in a couple of years to give them nesting cover. But in the next part, they need areas with a lot of bare ground when they're raising their chicks so that they can find bugs, find seeds, and more open. So more recently burned areas, then they need areas with thermal cover. And so again, all that habitat requirements can't be made by a whole landscape broadcast burning, and especially at a single time of the year. So there's a lot of benefit that we can get to wildlife by thinking about opening up that burn season during different times of year. Then we could talk about livestock, which again, a lot of the biggest majority of the burning in the southern Great Plains is done for livestock production. And so again, a lot of this, again, one reason goes back to that traditional spring burn season is people are burning right before green up, before they put cattle on those areas, so they get rid of the old growth, have fresh growth, and get that increased benefit. Because it's proven that we can get 10 to 15% increase in gains in stalker cattle by having them graze freshly burned tallgrass prairie. So by doing that, what if we change up that burn season? What kind of impact would that have to livestock production? We've been doing some work here around Stillwater and continuing to do so, looking at forage quality, looking at following after a burn. So if you see on this graph here, the blue line that has gone across, that's an unburned area, and that's the crude protein over time from April through the end of November. And if you look at it, it probably averages out about 5% crude protein spikes, just a little bit above 6%. Pretty low quality forage that's there on offer. But if we take something freshly burned in April, so this green line, this was an area that was burned in early April of 2009, and you see that we spiked that forage quality up above 18% crude protein. And it declined throughout the growing season, spiked a little bit again there in the late summer, probably got some decent rainfall, got that, and then finally trailed off to really low quality forage there in November. Start that. So what if we take and we add fire to the mix during the middle of the summer or during the middle of that growing season? So again, as we see with this line, we had an area that was previously unburned, lower forage quality, just like the unburned that we'd seen from the original first line on there. Burned it in July, spiked that crude protein up just very similar to what it was in the spring, up above 16% crude protein. And then we got a higher crude protein following throughout the remainder of the summer and going into fall and early winter. So we got an extreme benefit. So if you think about this from a livestock standpoint, what if you burned stuff in the spring, allowed them to graze fresh growth, and then halfway through that you burned another area? We could spike that so if you can keep that nutritional plane way high throughout the whole growing season. And again, this can not only benefit livestock, but it would be a huge benefit to wildlife. You think about the ability of having that high nutrition plane for a lot of wildlife species could be a huge benefit to a lot of the wildlife by looking at it. And then the other benefit that we see, all of our spring burns that we do, you only see the benefit of that just during that growing season, and that's it. But what we have noticed is from this line here, we see a real high spike in the spring. This was actually a burn that was done the previous August. So again, you get we not only got a spike like we did in this one here, where we did the summer burn, we got that spike in that, but we're also getting another repeated spike because of the grazing of the livestock is keeping the forage down, forage quality is still remaining high, and we're getting that benefit again in the spring. So it's almost given us a double shot of higher forage quality, which again, beneficial to livestock producers, but also can be very beneficial to wildlife if we take that into consideration. So another thing, why burn in different seasons of the year, and what about weather? We've talked about that. That's what we're talking about is why are we doing it? So again, we're getting more days, we're getting more hours, but one of the biggest things is we're getting more, if we open it up, we can get more consistent weather. We can burn during periods where there's fewer wind shifts, fewer fronts. Again, the example for here in Oklahoma and the southern Great Plains, that time frame that we try to burn of February, March, and April, that's a huge transition period going from winter to spring, where the jet streams are changing, frontal passages are changing. A lot of times we get fronts every 3 to 5 days coming through this region. And so with that, we'll get strong winds out of one direction before the front gets here. When the front gets here, we get strong winds out of the opposite direction. And then, hopefully we'll have a couple of calm days before another front comes through. But if that pattern gets to be, every 3 to 4 days, you get very little time to burn. But that's when we see that in the spring. But if you open it up, burn later on, July, August, September timeframe, we don't see a lot of fronts coming through. we've got more consistent weather patterns that are set up for longer periods of time, as we've seen in looking at the wind graphs, looking at how many southerly wind days we had in July, very consistent with that. And so there's going to be periods of time during the year that we have more consistent weather patterns, fewer fronts, fewer rainfall events, fewer things that are going to make burning more difficult and harder for people to get stuff done. Another thing that a lot of people run into problems with is burn bans and wildfire season. A lot of times, again, especially from this example here in our part of the world, again, January, February, and March are huge times when we see burn bans, when we do have high incidence of wildfire. And so again, does that make one season safer than the other? Because a lot of times people have this misconception that July here in Oklahoma is the worst time that you could burn because it's so hot. We got temperatures well over 100 degrees. Things can be drying down, high dry winds. But again, that's not the most dangerous time of year that we have for wildfires and things to do that. This example here, in Oklahoma, we have two types of burn bans. The governor can declare a burn ban, and that can be either statewide or it can be just specific counties within that. And then we also have where our county commissioners have the ability to declare burn bans just specifically to their county. And this map just shows a couple of years ago, this was in April, whenever, again, people were trying to burn and things were starting to dry out. We had 46 of our 77 counties here under a burn ban. And I got to watching this and monitoring this the rest of the year. And again, it wasn't because people are out burning that we're getting burn bans. It's just the conditions of the year. All the vegetation is dormant. Weather conditions are prone for wildfire. But people are also trying to burn during this time frame, and it makes it difficult with these burn bans. Again, like I said, over half the counties in the state were under burn ban. After the 1st of March, when things started greening up, I followed it for the rest of the year. We had 0 burn bans for the rest of the entire year. Again, so a lot of times thinking about burning in different seasons a year gets you out of these windows that a lot of times people are constantly thinking about burn bans and, again, limiting our time that we can burn. This is just the number of wildfires that occur in Oklahoma during the months, and as you have the months at the bottom, January, February, March, so on. As you see, March is the #1 month for wildfires in the state of Oklahoma in the past 10 years. We have more wildfires during that month than any other month that there is. Probably the biggest reason is if you look at the climatological data, March is the windiest month in Oklahoma by far. So that gives us, and again, when are everybody trying to burn in this region? In March. So that's the hardest time. So again, we see more burn bans and more problems like that. As you can see, you look over at July. July's kind of got a peak. There's wildfires that do occur in July, but kind of one of the most interesting things that we look at is area burned. So this is the acres that are burned by each month. Again, March, way more than anything. And if you'll also notice, and this one with the acres burned, if you'll notice November, December, January, February, March, a little bit of April. That's the dormant season. We get our first killing freeze, first part of November. Vegetation all goes dormant. At the highest risk of fire, November, December, January, February, and March, a little bit of April. Look at July, again, when a lot of times people think that's the most dangerous time of the year to burn because it's so dry. There's a lot of fires, but there's very little area burned because of the green component that's still in the fire to make it a whole lot safer and easier to do. So again, let's think about that in this aspect about burning considerations. So again, what about the safety of actually conducting prescribed burns? So again, burning in tallgrass prairie, we can have really tall flame leaks, really rapid rate of spreads if we burn in the dormant seasons, that February, March, April time frame. As you see in that picture on the upper right there, that's just a little flank fire in some tall grass. T-post sticking up with a sign on it's about 5 foot tall. And there's no wind influence in those flames. That's just all fuel-borne flames. So you can see the intensity and the heat that goes out. And the other thing is just notice, you can notice the flames that are in that. Well, what if we think about burning in July, burning in that growing season, changing that up? Here's the same kind of fuels that you can see in that upper right picture. There's another T-post sticking up there. You can barely see the flames. Again, those growing season burns that we're doing, we see shorter flame lengths, slower rates of spreads, lower fire intensity, but we're seeing fires that are just as effective even with the less intensity that we're seeing on our fire. Totally different fire behavior. But also the main factor of it is the safety part of it. So again, if you've got fires that you need to be burned under safer conditions where things can be done, we try to tell people think about burning in the growing season, because again, that green component totally changes the total fire behavior that's going on. So it's really important to see that. So again, you can compare these fire intensity pictures to those fire intensity pictures, and it makes a huge difference in their thinking about the safety part of it. And probably, one of the other things that we think about is that, again, it's thinking about what about growing season fire, and if we are trying to go out and to control brush, control invasive species that are coming in there, a lot of invasive trees and stuff that we're getting on our prairies, we think about that lethal time temperature curve. It's about 150 degrees is the thermal death temperature of most living plant tissue. Depends upon moisture condition, but it ranges, but it averages around 150 degrees. So, if you're thinking about you're out there burning on a day in the dormant season that it's only 50 degrees outside or 60, you've got to raise that temperature up about 90 to 100 degrees. But if we're burning in the growing season, and it's already almost 100 degrees out there, we only have to raise the temperature about 50 degrees to get something done. And we have found that from what we have, some information that we have here doing a cedar mortality study. Eastern red cedar is one of our biggest problems that we have throughout most of the southern Great Plains and the other juniper species spreading out a little further west of us that are also a large problem. And again, we get a lot of people asking the questions, can we kill those eastern red cedar if we burn in the growing season? And so that's what we looked at here at Stillwater a couple of years ago on that. And this is just some of the data from that we have looked at. So again, you see the box. These were the average flame lengths in feet that we recorded when we burned through our plots. These plots that we burned were 20 meters by 20 meters. They were all burned with a head fire lit on the two downwind sides, or the two upwind sides of the plot, and allowed to burn. And so the flame length, the average flame length during the dormant season, which we had dormant vegetation, and these are all tallgrass prairie invaded by eastern red cedar. Dormant vegetation, we had little over 4 foot tall flame lengths. In the growing season, again, our flame lengths only averaged 1.5 feet. Max flame length, these are the max flame lengths that we saw. This is also included cedars that were crowning out, was about 17 feet. Notice in the growing season, it was pretty much the same. We looked at flame depth, so that flame bed that was actively burning, we had about 3 foot flame depth there in the dormant season, while in the growing season, it was about 6 inches wide area burning behind the main fire front. Probably one of the most interesting things is that burn time. And so this is the total burn time that it took to burn that entire plot out. In the dormant season, we're going on just barely under 2 minutes to burn a 20 meter by 20 meter plot. But in the growing season, we're looking at an area of about almost 9 minutes to burn that same exact area. And again, the temperatures, 65 degrees compared to 98. We had the same wind speeds, same max wind speeds were recorded. The humidity was higher in the growing season, so it was wetter. 1 hour field moisture is a little bit drier. 10 hours, you can see that. The most interesting part of it is, again, the leaf moisture content of the cedars. if you look at on the far right, the dormant season we had 88% leaf moisture, while in the growing season we had 102% leaf moisture. So the cedars were wetter. It was more humid out, so you would think that the mortality would probably be a lot less, especially if you look at a whole lot shorter flame length, shorter flame depth, and on that. But this is the results of kind of what happened within that study. These are the number of trees. The first one, the post-burn trees, is the number of trees that were within each plot. So each plot had about the same number of cedar trees within it, whether it was dormant season or growing season. The percent scorch is the percent of the trees that were in each plot that were scorched. And so that means they were just browned out or scorched. That percent scorched, so in the growing season, we scorched about 90% of each tree. Got 90% scorch on each tree. While in the dormant season is about 79%. Again, probably not, even if not statistically different, they're very similar. But the important thing to think about, remember, that's comparing the difference between a 4.5 foot flame length and a 1.5 foot flame length. So big difference. The third columns there are percent consumed. So this was the percent of the tree that was consumed by fire. So it started to crown out. In the growing season, we crowned out 45% of the canopy of most of the trees that were in the plot, whereas in the dormant season, we only 35% of the canopy was consumed of the trees that were in there. Interesting thing to note again is the max scorch height was the same for both that. So that's the height that maximum height that we recorded scorch on any of the trees, and actually that's in meters to do that. So it's almost 9 foot of scorch. The tree height, that was the average tree height. It's almost 3 meters. So we're getting pretty high scorch pretty much each. But the thing is to again notice that the growing season fires were just as effective, if not more effective, than the dormant season fires, with changes in flame length. Those comparison of flame lengths, burn times, even trees that were even wetter, a lot more moisture in them, we're still able to do a lot more with that growing season burn time frame that was in there. And so, not saying that fires or that all fires should be limited or just all growing season fires. The thing is to think about and to take away from this is that we need to open up our burn season and open it up to where we can get more burning done throughout the year, because that's always our limiting factor, is getting things done. The greatest example of this is here in Oklahoma is our wildlife department. They try to burn on all their wildlife management areas, but their biggest problem that they have is they limit themselves to burning in that spring time frame, and they limit it from January 15th, because that's when the end of deer season is, until the 1st of April. That's when turkey season starts, because they don't want to have to contend with trying to burn with hunters in their areas and stuff. So they limit themselves to a short window time frame in there. And again, a lot of times they get caught in those bad weather events that come through, or burn bans, anything that comes through, and it again strictly limits their burn time. So again, they're thinking about opening that up, doing some more growing season burns when there's less hunting pressure, less use by people during the summer months out in those areas and stuff, to open that up to get more things burned. And that's the whole thing about thinking about these techniques, and what we're doing is trying to get more fire on the ground, get it more effectively, get it done more safely, and get it done easier. Because a lot of times it may be easier and safer to burn that during the growing season when you have a little bit of green component in it, and then the fires aren't near as intense. It's a whole lot safer and easier to do that. So with that, that's what I have here from this information from that, and I think we'll have time to answer some questions and things with that. Go to Jennifer.
Yes, we do have plenty of time for questions. So thank you, John. That was lots of great information in that presentation. And for those of you who joined us during the presentation, my name is Jennifer Evans, and I'm an Extension Assistant at North Carolina State University, working as part of the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability. And today you just saw the presentation by John Weir, who works as a research associate on the faculty of the Natural Resource Ecology and Management Department at Oklahoma State University. So at this point, we're going to take the time left in our hour to address some of the questions from the audience. We have had a few questions already been entered into the chat box, so if you have a question or comment for John, go ahead and type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen now, and then we'll ask John the questions in the order that they're received. So John, one of our first questions was, what's the main ignition pattern or technique used for prescribed burning in open range? And one of the participants had answered a ring fire, so could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, typically, pretty much, I would say well over 90%, 95% of all the burning done in our region around is ring fire technique. So again, what we'll specifically do is we'll backfire the two downwind sides and get an adequate black before we finish the initial ring process of lighting the head fire part of it. A lot of times especially with cedar infestation, cedars being a very volatile fuel that we have, we need at least establish at least about 300 foot of black before we finish ringing the fire all the way on out. So we'll use other techniques, flank fires or strip head fires to widen that black out if we need to get it wide enough before we do it. But then, essentially it's a ring fire pattern that we use to ignite, I'd say 95% of everything in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and probably Nebraska as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Our next question is about prescribed burn associations, and I was also kind of wondering, how are the prescribed burn associations helping to get more burning done than in the past? But our question was, are prescribed burn associations increasing in Oklahoma as much as they are in Texas?
So, yeah, that's a good question. I guess first thing, for those people that aren't familiar with prescribed burning associations, just real quick, what a prescribed burn association is where you get into a region, area. Most of the times it's kind of like a county-wide group of private landowners that get together. They pool their resources, typically a lot of times under the tutelage of somebody from an state or federal agency, county extension, and they pool all their resources and stuff, work together, and they help each other burn. And so they kind of form a lease cooperative where they help each other burn to try to address the issues of liability, not enough equipment, not enough manpower to help them get stuff burned, and so they can all do that. The number of burn associations is definitely increasing. We currently now in Oklahoma, we have 18 prescribed burn associations here in Oklahoma, and Texas, I believe, has 12. I think they have 12 or 14 somewhere in that time frame. So they're definitely increasing. Kansas has 7 at the last count I had, and I think they've been growing a few more. Nebraska has 14 in that part. There's 1 in Colorado. Mississippi has 1. There's 1 and possibly 2 now. They was trying to start another one in Illinois to doing that. And so they're starting to catch on. A lot of other states are trying to get them, and they're definitely increasing the number of fires and the number of acres that are getting burned throughout the region where they start. Also, a lot of times the fires that these folks are doing, again, they're doing them very safely. They're conducting good burns and getting things done effectively and safely on their own lands.
Okay, great. And I know that you've been to Florida and a couple other states to talk about setting some new ones up there too as well. So I'm sure if anybody from the audience has questions about how to set one up, they could contact you. Yeah,
just feel free to contact me. We'd be glad to work with that. We've also in the this past couple of years, we have worked on actually forming the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association, which is an umbrella organization where all the burn associations can come under that, working to, again, help them get more grants, to buy more equipment, provide more training opportunities for them. Actually, the statewide burn association, we just got a statewide radio frequency, and we purchased a bunch of radios that we're handing out to the burn associations so that, you know, we can have good communications. They can have good communications on their fires and stuff. Again, that's a big major cost to a lot of them landowners is, you know, again, good communication. So if we can help provide that, that's important. Also help provide some insurance and some liability protection to that, and so that's important. And then also we have formed a regional alliance, the Alliance of Prescribed Burn Associations, with people from Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska to work on prescribed burn association issues that are very common to each state.
Okay, great. And I went ahead and I posted your email address in the chat box for anybody who's interested in contacting John. Okay, and our next question from the audience is, do you use Behave for your fire planning?
No, I do not use Behave on our fire planning. A lot of times it's interesting when we run Behave on, especially with a lot of our heavy tall grass fuels, it goes off the chart for a lot of the things with that, and that's just our normal everyday burns that we do with heavy fuel loads in tall grass prairie. You know, we can get especially in dormant conditions, we can get very tall flame lengths, very rapid rates of spreads, and on that. And so I don't use it, haven't used it in a long time. I'm familiar with it, but I just haven't used it in a long time.
Okay. Our next question is, do you have any reliable snowpack?
Reliable snowpack?
Yes.
Not in Oklahoma. We do not. We don't average. I think our statewide average is maybe 24 inches of snowfall a year, being greater in the northwest part of the state and reducing as you go southeast. We typically, if we get any kind of snow, it normally does not last more than a day or two on that, because a big snowfall here is 4 inches, and then it'll melt pretty quickly.
Okay, great. And if anybody does have any more questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box. We have a few more minutes, but as of right now, this is our last question that I have on the board. And the question is, did you look at the amount of nitrogen per acre after burning? Your presentation listed percents, but I suspect that the amounts available changed as well.
I guess the question is talking about the crude protein, the forage quality grass. I don't have the data from me. Nitrogen was figured in there, but I don't have the amounts that are in there. So again, it was used to figure crude protein in there. So we do have the nitrogen amounts on that. And also, if you make note, again, that's all the available plants that are out there within that time frame. So you can see, there's a huge change in that plant community. And also, as you can see in tallgrass prairie, our forage quality drops very rapidly throughout the summer. And so that's why a lot of programs have been set up the way they are. But again, it goes back to when we get consistent, everybody wanting to burn at one certain time of the year.
Okay. We actually had 2 more questions come in, and I think we'll have time for them. The first one is, would extended drought change your outlook on summer burning?
Extended drought doesn't change my outlook on summer burning. It just changed my ability to conduct summer burns. To do summer burning, we have to have an amount of old growth to get the fire started and ignited. We just can't go out and light fresh green growing plants around here. They're not volatile enough to carry a fire. We have to have old growth to get the fire going and doing that. And this last year, we haven't been able to do hardly any growing season burns because of the 2 previous years of extreme drought we had. We just haven't grown enough to leave any old residue. So it hasn't changed my thoughts on doing any kind of growing season burns or anything. Again, we're not going to impact our plant community by that, because all of our native plants are adapted to these extreme drought events and adapted to fire over the, the centuries that they've been here on the Great Plains. The best thing you can do, if you want to really kill plants on the Great Plains, is not burn them and plow them up. But no, the drought hasn't changed my outlook. It's just changed my ability to be able to do it. So, it's kind of slowed us down.
Okay, great. And I think we have one final question here, and that was, do you work with air quality representatives in your state?
Yes, we do. We've worked with them several times, working with getting our air quality plan put together and stuff. That's our Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. Been waiting on them. They've been really good to work with, and we try to keep them in the loop on everything that we're doing, so we can keep them informed so that they can make informed decisions, and also they know they can come to us for reliable information. And we're not trying to be at war with them. We want everybody work together, and so that's the best way that we can do to promote fire in this state is work with them. And so far we've got good people in our state environmental quality to work with.
Okay, great. We appreciate it, and I think that's all of our time for today. So I'd like to thank you, John, for your presentation, and thanks also to everyone in the audience who joined us, and we hope that this webinar will be useful to you in your fire management and fire research programs. If you'd like to hear about our future webinars and programming from the Southern Fire Exchange, you can join their email list or follow them on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. You can also go to their website for more information. So today's webinar was recorded and will be archived for later viewing on both the Southern Fire Exchange YouTube page and also on the Forestry webinar portal. If you'd like to be automatically informed about other upcoming webinars, you can join the email subscription list at forestrywebinars.net and then just click on subscribe.